All right, so let's get going. Other people can join in as they come up. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So thanks for being here today for the CNAA presentation and seminar on evaluating master planning your outdoor athletic facilities. Quick agenda review here. So we'll talk about just got a little background on myself and Verde Design, and then jump right into assessments, what they are, how we use them, what components there are, and then master planning, what that is, and just kind of how we use them, what their components are as well. Real quick about myself. I've been doing this since late 90s. We have Verde Design is a landscape architecture, civil engineering design firm. We have 4 offices throughout the state, and we are affiliated with California Interscholastic Federation, or CIF. We are their official civil engineering landscape architecture design firm. So we kind of represent them at seminars and their trade shows, and kind of gives us a foothold in one of our core market groups, which is K-12 schools, and we're specialists in the outdoor athletic facilities. At the end, I'll give you my contact information in case you need to ask any questions or just want to follow up on something specific to your facility. So, assessments and master planning can be kind of, quite frankly, kind of hand in hand. They're almost interrelated a lot of times. First off, on assessments, what are they? Well, they're not an inventory, first and foremost. A lot of times I think they're just counting widgets, things like that. And that isn't necessarily the case. Typically what they are is simply put, it's a planning tool. We are looking at what you have in a quantifiable and qualitative manner, and then working with you and knowing what your known deficiencies and needs are. We essentially use this information to develop a summation that usually is a tool that we use to educate everybody in developing the other component, which we're going to talk about today, which is a master plan. So a lot of times do go hand in hand. Basic components we usually see in these assessments, we're looking at addressing safety considerations, site accessibility from a code compliance standpoint, obviously standards from NFHS or your local athletic league, rules of sport, looking at just site work, be it hardscape, softscape, irrigation areas for natural grass fields, things of that nature. And then we also look at it from 2 different perspectives. We look at it from a perspective of if we're renovating existing facilities, or is this a new facility, maybe a piece of land you're purchasing for a new private school campus, which we have done, and we assess how we can plan out the athletic facilities for the new piece of land. We've done that for a number of private schools that are in urban campuses where they don't have athletic facilities, and they bring us on board to look at a potential parcel purchase and what can fit within that land. Some of the considerations when we're doing these assessments really come the users themselves, not only obviously the athletes and the parents, the spectators, the coaches, the staff that have the kids out there, but also it's incredibly important that the facilities and maintenance ops teams are also involved in providing some input and feedback in these assessments. And as I said, is it an existing facility or is it a new facility? It's really important to kind of have that understanding of how they're different. So on the components of these facilities, we're looking at, obviously right up front, we want to know what your programmatic needs. So we're not going into an assessment without looking at the long game, the big picture, and what probably your end goal of this assessment is. It's not just a no, it's bad, but how we're going to plan on making it better. What your needs are, 2 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. what the safety issues are. Again, code compliance from an accessibility standpoint, underground infrastructure, above ground infrastructure, lighting, things like that always are important to look at. And not only look at your present, but also future needs. Are there going to be other sports you want this to be planned for? Other outside user groups you potentially may be sharing the cost for the improvements, and they are going to have a rental or a use agreement. Again, the athletic rules of sport, make sure we're compliant, and also looking for planning ahead for what other rules may come on board. Gender equity obviously is in everyone's mind, unless you're, a single sex parochial school, such as all boys school, all girls school. And then prioritization in terms of who's using it more often, a lot of times they'll come into play. What components can be reused? As we're looking at these elements, a lot of times budget's an issue. What can we salvage and reuse when we're looking at these assessments is always very, very important. When we're looking at the assessments and we're looking at the finished products, a couple things that are, the usual typical deliverables. Usually there is an executive summary, a brief narrative, 2 to 3 pages usually, that's surmising the report. And what this is going to do is go to usually the key stakeholders, but also decision makers, people that may not be always involved in the process of going through the assessment. Usually there's then the background, detailed driven information that's both qualitative and quantitative. And that's a detailed background information that you can then refer to and that's the nuts and bolts of all of our work in the being out in the field. Obviously the costs are near and dear to everyone's heart in terms of making sure they can pay for it. We're looking usually at initial ROMs for capital improvement costs, and also the life cycle costs, annual M&O costs, as well as turnkey life cycle product replacements, things of that nature. Eric, if you could, thank you. And then, the living document component is, I think, is important. These assessments, they just don't stop when we publish it and provide it as an end product. These can be routinely updated and oftentimes are based on renovations or priorities that change. And, as we are going to pivot into the master planning, a lot of times these are done as part of, a singular effort. And there's just it's a nuanced, you got the assessment part, you got the master plan part, but they usually go hand in hand. Usually don't do a master plan without an assessment, and vice versa. Usually don't do an assessment, just stop there, because usually there's an end game that you have as the end user for your school. A couple things to just understand on assessments as well as, it's only as good as the feedback we get. You guys and gals at these schools, these are your sites, and we are kind of stewards from the design professional standpoint to help you out. But at the end of the day, having the coaches involved, the facility staff involved, the administration involved, sometimes outside users involved that are integral to the use of your sites, it's really important that they are part of this process. They're providing programmatic input. They are helping us expose potential issues that you know about that we wouldn't know about because we haven't been on your site like you have. It's really important that that information is provided to us. Conversely, on our end of the table, I think it's important that you vet out who you're hiring as your consultant, that they are experienced in this type of design, and that athletic facilities, knowing rules of sport, knowing how they are used, how the spectators use the sites, as well as the, physical education kids. The kids are in sports, outside users. I think it's important that you do your due diligence, make sure this is something they have done as a standard course of business. And then just understanding that the assessments aren't master plans and that one can work with the other, but they are typically very distinctly different items. And so with that, are there any questions on assessments, or I'll just kind of pivot into the master planning component of it? If you do have any questions, just throw them in the chat and I can answer them as they come up. Not a problem. So on the master planning, you know, a lot of times people see this graphic that's on the screen and that's what they consider a master plan, a pretty little graphic. And it certainly can be, but it can be done for a single field. It can be done for an entire campus. It can be done for a, you know, in this sense, it could be a district-wide approach, or if you have multiple campuses, which a lot of private schools do have, it could be that type of scenario where we're looking at all holistically, all their sites. When should you be doing this? I mean, I think typically it's, you do it anytime, but usually it's to provide a visioning document and a planning tool for, you know, some planned improvements that, you know, are on your radar, and really is probably providing clarity in advance of hiring a designer to really do that, the next step of design development, construction drawings, things like that.
I do have a question.
Yes, Eric.
Do you work, so if the school's doing like a rebuild, will you work with the, if they have architects that are doing the actual school building to do the athletic facility? Or is that something you guys would not entertain doing?
Yes, we do work where we're under an architect, where we're a sub to them. We do work where the architect and us are both under contract directly with the school, and we just kind of play nice in the sandbox, right? And work hand in hand, because a lot of times our work is touching their work, and they have to be sequenced a certain way from a construction standpoint and planned a certain way. So absolutely.
Especially with the rebuild and with trying to maximize space.
Exactly. Yeah. And we take it a step further. A lot of times, because you're parochial schools, at least in California, they have very, very tight public contract code bidding rules, you know, I mean, actual laws. And so private schools don't have to answer to any of that. So in California specifically, we do a lot of work with parochial schools where they hire the builder actually, and then we either work for the builder or we work directly with the owner, and then we work hand in hand with the builder and an architect to kind of to turnkey it.
And do you work out of state?
We have, I mean, typically right now, on a planning standpoint, it's much easier because it's almost all virtual other than initial site work. But typically when we're doing CDs, usually our work is in the Western states that we've been. I think the farthest east we've gone is Colorado. We did some work at Air Force.
I just moved to Utah, so I'm working at a school in Utah, and they're looking at relocating the actual facility, including the builds. That's why I've talked with you guys several times when I was at my previous school.
Yeah, it comes down, and we could talk offline, but it comes down when we have to do drawings. We just have to have reciprocity for our professional stamps. So
understandable.
And then how long does this take? Depends on the complexity really of the engagement and how many meetings we're doing, to be honest. I mean, we've had master plans for whole campuses that we pound out in a very exhaustive way. It's maybe a month. But I would say typically to do an area such as this on the screen, it's usually 2 to 3 months. The assessment work, depending on how we sequence a work, can be part of that 2 to 3 months. We've had processes the last 5 to 8 months. It just really depends on what your needs are and how quickly we kind of go from step to step and how many meetings we need to have. And that's all items that you just need to carefully scope out with your design professional. Again, similar to the assessments, there are probably some things that I hear from time to time that aren't fully accurate. And I think the biggest one is they're not worth it, or it's not, it's money not well spent. And I will say it depends on if you're just going to take out a field and put a new field from grass to turf, that certainly doesn't need a master plan. But if you're trying to reimagine if your space is effectively used, or you're trying to squeeze in another field or some outdoor athletic facilities such as hitting tunnels, a weight room building, what have you, and you don't know where to put it, I think that's where the value of a master plan is. Bring in a professional who does this all the time, and it is a drop in the bucket compared to your capital cost to build it. And it's, if you spend, let's just say $2 million on a facility for $20,000 to $30,000, you've probably opened your eyes on opportunities they never thought you could for going through this process. I'm not saying the process would be exactly $20,000 or $30,000, but in the scheme of things, it's a drop in the bucket for what you're going to spend out to do athletic facilities. And the beauty of it is you have this visioning document that, depending on what level you take it to, can be used for fundraising purposes, sharing with the people that need to authorize the funds. There's a lot of different ways you can use these tools. It's not just a digital PDF that is that has some costs associated with it. But I think where master plans really can help you, and we'll talk about this, is reimagining sites, and then the implementation plans and how you would potentially phase the work. Because usually on a lot of these larger developments, you're not going to have that money usually all at once, and you have to build it over time. And that's where I think the master plan is an excellent planning tool. And it is definitely something, I will show a case study. These definitely get built, and they are not fixed. They're digital. They can be manipulated rather easily, rather quickly, and for a minimal cost. So the keys to successful master plan, very similar to assessment. One, an assessment probably should be part of it. Very proactive, clear communication, having the right people part of that communication, because the most important portion of our design team are you, the school, the end users, the owners, the operators, the maintainers of those facilities. Having the administration facilities staff, both site staff as well as maybe staff that's coming off campus, that's a coach who's got a day job. That happens all the time. Getting them involved, making sure the meetings are set so that they can be a key team member. That's always important. Obviously, I think having some athletes involved is a good thing, because they have a unique perspective. Being high school kids, they have some ideas a lot of times that are valuable. You're not always going to get maintenance ops. And I think just going in with an open mind, it's funny, we'll sometimes get contracted and I'm meeting with the CFO and the president of the school and nobody else. Well, we know what we want. And that's fine, I guess, if that's their MO, but I think you're not getting full value of what we are under contract to do, they're paying us to do, that you could potentially really illuminate the room much brighter to have other key decision makers involved, even though maybe the key decision makers are the CFO and the president. Why not have people that are running a full spectrum? And I think that, quote, open-mindedness, in terms of, it starts with who's engaged in the process, in my opinion, in my experience. Also, having a vision right off the bat, I think, is important. Yeah, it helps us shape us and direct us to a certain path. And that's, usually starts with a clearly defined program. We will absolutely take it and maybe move it in a couple different directions that you weren't thinking about. because that's why you're hiring us. That's our experience that comes into play. And us doing this a few hundred times, we've kind of been there, done that, and you haven't probably. And so that's one of the things you're paying us for, is to provide that unique experience and skill set. And also, I think right off the bat, we don't want to design something that is unrealistic to your budget. So knowing an upfront budget is always helpful to us. And then we can work with you and update you, hey, we're going to be going past this number, or, we still got some flexibility in our budget based on what the program is. We could probably add in a few things. I think that's really good for us to know right off the bat. So again, that's part of that honest communication. Our end product is only going to be as good as the collaborative effort that we're all going to be part of. So something to consider is, when you hire that design professional, have an understanding of what the budget you want this project to be, and look at that program. Prioritization, always good to know, hey, here's going to be the most important parts of this, and here are the things I can't build over the fall because of fall sports. And obviously we understand when sports are in the fall versus summer, but that's always a good thing to think about. And then flexibility, just understanding going in that you don't have just one crack at this. It can pivot, it can be flexible. And I think that's really important to just understand. So the three areas we usually look when we're developing this master plan, it's the programming element, the pricing element, and then the delivery of the project, usually the phasing or implementation element. We'll just run through these three areas. So first off, on programming, similar to the assessments, we look at it usually with a certain perspective as we're walking through. First off, obviously, are the users, the main users anyway, namely the athletes and the people coming to watch the athletes. We also look at it from the faculty administration side, the maintenance ops side, how they're going to keep these facilities looking as pristine as they possibly can. And then the site staff that are essentially running the programs. I think that's also important. The physical education teachers, the coaches, people, the trainers too. I think a lot of times they're forgotten how they're going to access it, where their equipment needs to be. Do they need to have a training room out at a particular remote field on your campus? Things like that. The big picture items we look at obviously are, surface types, natural versus synthetic, urethane tracks versus vulcanized rubber, cushion courts versus tennis courts versus post-tension concrete or asphalt. Are we doing is our aquatic facility going to require a bulkhead? Are we doing a deep dive pool? Things like that. And then think about future flexibility. Are they dedicated fields, multi-use fields? Do we have to plan for future fields coming in? Potentially, or you need a rugby pitch. You're going to have a field hockey specific field, things like that. The outside users that you currently have on campus, potential ones you want to partner with so that they provide some economic sharing of the costs, or they look at some revenue stream to allow you to replace the turf carpet in 12 years, things like that. Maybe you can't afford lights, or politically, environmentally with your neighbors, you can't put them in now, but you want to plan for them. Those are all the kinds of things that we want to hear from you right from the start, what your big picture vision is. And we want to hear the what ifs, they maybes, so that we can plan for that and educate you on what those will require. And it may shape maybe a different solution for a particular element you want. The facility elements, all the site furnishings, the turnkey elements that are going to finish out the projects, to make them as functional and special as they can be. Obviously, these are all things that are the devil's in the details, but they are important to address as part of this process if we can, especially from a budget standpoint. A lot of these elements can be inconsequential in the scheme of a site layout, but a drinking fountain at a stadium might be a $3,500 product, but it costs $25,000 to get a water line and a waste line to it. So, knowing that and planning for you so you had the accurate cost estimate for it, it's important for you to tell us these are all the needs. Let us then tell you how best to plan for the development and implementation of those elements. So the more you tell us, the better. Spectators, looking at obviously the seating, control points, point of entry, ticketing, the user areas such as concessions, restrooms. If you're going to have a swag area where you're selling paraphernalia, that's always important. And just circulation spots, spectator safety from lacrosse balls, things like that. Just important to understand. We go through all the considerations as you're designing this new facility or renovating existing facility. Points of arrival and drop off. So parking, both from usually a right-of-way area, and usually there's multiple points of connection from parking areas, and how we're getting from A to B. Make sure it's a safe and clear signed area. It's secured. It's usually, there's some cameras maybe involved to make sure it's not vandalized. In some of the areas we work, that's definitely something that is a necessity. Those are all things you should be thinking about, and your consultant should be discussing with you. Maintenance ops, if we just put in a $4 million facility, I don't think we've done a good job if we don't plan for it to be maintained to look like a $4 million facility on year 8, year 12, year 14. And so understanding what equipment you need to maintain it, where that equipment's going to be accessed in relation to your athletic facilities, what the needs are for a natural grass field and synthetic turf field are obviously very, very different. And coming up with, access points and some strategies, how that product, when it's put in, how it's going to be replaced in 10 to 12 years. Make it easy and economic for someone to maintain that field and replace that field. That's always important. As well as, just community access, emergency access was also key things to think about, not just your own internal teams from a maintenance standpoint. And then, looking at the options from a programming standpoint, this is a fun part. This is taking all that information on the programming standpoint and then looking at opportunities. This largely is not overly dynamic or creative if we're just going to rebuild a field in its current spot. But sometimes it's worth the effort to look at how your campus could be reimagined, essentially, and looking at different spatial opportunities within your available land footprint. And so this is something that is very effective, very quick to do, i.e. inexpensive to do with your stakeholders. And usually is done at the same time with your stakeholders. We come up with some ideas. We call it a digital design strat. And we come up with some opportunities and then work with you to actually develop a refined design that ultimately would be your master plan, at least your starting point for a visual master plan. It's a really cool process. And it's not unique to us. Anyone can do it. And then once we have that process and that plan completed from a programming standpoint, the cost estimate is usually undertaken. Again, it's a planning tool, allows you to budget, allows you to fundraise. It's usually a big picture item, but depending on how detailed we get into the programming, we can get down to a pretty good, accurate level. And for example, the second bullet I think is really important to know is that we can give you options, as an example here, just dugouts. Are they chain link dugouts at open air, which most high schools wouldn't want to have? Do they have a fabric roof, maybe a metal shaded roof? Maybe they're a concrete block with a metal roof, cast in place concrete dugouts. Are they at grade? Are they sunken? All those items for a rectangle on a graphic plan, it could represent a cost that's $12,000. It could represent a cost that's $112,000 or somewhere in between. And depending on the level of options you want to have, the sky's almost the limit really on that. So it's something to kind of think about as you're going to undertake this type of process. How deep in the weeds do you want to get? How many options do you want to explore? It's up to you, to be honest. So think of it in that, to that level of nuance and detail as you start thinking about what level of flexibility you want to have in your process. Take into account, make sure your designers take into account escalation, inflation, especially on a multi-phase project, especially here in California, in the Bay Area. We have without a doubt, the most inflatable construction economy in the country. I mean, as a point of reference, we do work in Southern California. Costs there are probably about 30% less on average than the same exact project in Northern California, with no differences. And it's largely due to the labor costs down there are considerably less than they are here. And it's dramatic, and you wouldn't believe it, but it is the case. The turf cost per square foot's the same, but the prevailing wages for those installers is very, very different. And those are the things you just have to make sure your design professional has a really good handle on, especially if you're going to try to hire someone from out of the area. They have to know and do some due diligence on that. And, kind of, Eric, to your point, I think, building architects are really good at certain things, but unless they do athletic facilities as a standard course, a lot of times they're taking numbers off of, let's say, they use a cost estimating consultant, and they take, their numbers off of E&R and trade, spreadsheets that they have access to. Well, that is for general engineering and general building construction. These athletic facilities are kind of a world unto themselves. If you don't understand everything that goes into a turf field and the specific base materials that go under the turf and the pads and the complexity of the asphalt for a running track and with tolerances of that, it's not a parking lot. You can't use that square footage price for a track asphalt because it won't pencil out when you get the bid. So it's just important to understand that if you get inaccurate ROM numbers, rough order of magnitude budget numbers from a master plan, and you are planning for that, when you get your bids 6 months down the line from the builder, you may be rather disappointed with your end product from the master plan. You need to make sure whoever's doing that really has a good sense of what things cost and that they have delivered these kinds of projects. They're not just planners, but they have actually had them built, and they've worked with builders who are specialized in this type of work. That's really important. And then the phasing component, kind of the third element of the master plan, is looking at a visioning document that allows you to realistically fund it and build it in a period of time that we're still alive. And that is something that's really important. And it's a little bit of an art to come up with sensible sequences, on a plan. To draw in a box outline, that's easy. But to understand where infrastructure, piping, how it wants to not only support the track and field, but also later phases like baseball fields, softball fields, and other exterior areas, that's where a unique skill set on how to build things and how to spend money wisely the first time and not spend it multiple times. That's what is really important. Again, this is something that is incredibly flexible and dynamic. There's a living document. As your budget changes, which it very likely will, based on a donor coming and going, these can be manipulated rather easily. So it's a planning tool that is living with you as your situation changes, because it likely will. So that's kind of how the master plan process goes. I'm going to just kind of show you a quick example of a master plan process we went through at a high school in Stockton. They actually hired us to do a facilities assessment pre-bond. And then as they were going after a public bond measure, this is a public high school in Stockton. It was one of 4 high schools actually. They had us master plan the project as they were working with the community to get the bond passed. So this was the existing site. North on this is up. So you're looking up on north here, but you can see here was a very tired campus. They played none of their sports other than baseball on the campus. The pool was closed due to safety issues. They didn't play tennis here. Football, track, and softball were all played down the road at the University of Pacific. And it's just, they were underutilizing their property, quite honestly, largely from a liability standpoint was a decision, but also it just was done in the 50s and never refreshed. So this bond largely was to update all 4 of their high school facilities and some of their elementary schools grounds. So what we did was we came up with a process where we were rotating the stadium, putting it closer to the public right-of-way, essentially gaining space and putting an all-new softball field where the west end of the track used to be. Baseball seemed to be in a good spot. We kept it there. And where softball was, we added a brand new parking area dedicated to all the athletic precinct, brand new pool that was both for water polo and competitive swimming, new tennis courts. Again, location of it made sense because they were shared and used by the community as well. And then brand new natural grass athletic fields. All the other fields, they decided they didn't want to maintain. They couldn't maintain them with their available staff. So they all went synthetic turf. And they all wanted everything to be lit. That was a core requirement just based on temperature out in Stockton, Central Valley, California. They wanted everything to be able to have the opportunity to play at night. So they wanted some digital renderings, 3D bird's eye views that we could provide to the community to kind of get interest and support. So each of the fields kind of had their own whole bunch of perspectives done. This is one of several that we did with them. And this was part of the master planning process. They engaged us to kind of do these renderings. So reimagining the space, getting people excited. That was kind of what their core goal was of their master planning and the preceding assessment process was. And that's the built facility. So it really did become, the vision did become reality. And it was very accurate in terms of what we thought we could deliver, and what they constructed was very close. You see here, this is, they're using phase 1. They've secured the site, and now they're building phase 2. They're doing the lime treatment, chemical stabilization of the subsoil there, because it's very expansive out in that area of the Central Valley. There's phase 2 completed. And then you kind of see here's phase 1 and phase 2, the vision to the left, reality to the right. And then phase 3 completed. So, it's in conclusion, just want to say that first off, thanks for joining. I think, the vehicles of an assessment master plan are very flexible based on what your needs are. how you want, what you have to spend on these types of efforts. But I think, you get out of them what you put into them, quite honestly. And these are products, I think, that are very well served and can be extremely valuable to open your eyes and illuminate. I've used that word a lot of times because it's true. Illuminates what is possible. And so, there's obviously limitations on budgets and land, but within that, I think you have opportunities before you that probably you can't always think about or imagine. And that's where I think a design professional can assist. So with that, thanks for your participation and you being here today. I'd be happy to take any Q&A right now. If offline, if you want to throw me an email and ask a particular question or what about scenario, my contact information is below.